So Cece decided to, she does not need assistance to get on these couches, because this is what her new project is she brought her couch to our big couch and is sliding down it. It's a lovely day in the life of Cece. Mommy's got her black label on. Mama's not playing. Cece, Bella, honey, stop pushing your sister right now, or you're going to bed. Bella, I'll get it from her. Stop, I'll get it from her.
What if the autopsy findings in Shanann Watt's case told a story that the official investigation never fully explained? Not about whether Chris Watts did it. Everyone knows he did it. But about what those findings actually reveal about how it happened. About what was done to her. About details buried inside a medical examiner's report that most people who have followed this case for 8 years have never been shown. If that question just stopped you, then what you are about to hear is going to stay with you long after this video ends. So subscribe to Dark Pulse right now with the notification bell on and stay until the very end. Because by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why those autopsy findings still raise questions that nobody has properly confronted. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching this from and what time is it over there as you are watching. I read every single one. Hit that like button, share this with someone who has followed this case, and subscribe to Dark Pulse with the notification bell turned all the way on. Now let us get into it. August the 13th, 2018. Frederick, Colorado. Shanann Watts had just returned home from a business trip to Arizona at 1:48 in the morning. 15 weeks pregnant. Exhausted, she climbed into bed next to her husband. By 5:15 that same morning, Chris Watts had left for work. By noon, nobody could reach Shanann. Not her friends, not her family, not the people she had been texting just hours before her flight landed. At 12:10 in the afternoon, a friend named Nicole arrived at the Watts home and could not get through to Shanann. She called Chris. He came home, walked through the door, and told Nicole that Shanann was not there, that the girls were not there, that nobody was there. That same afternoon, Chris Watts stood in front of a television camera in his front yard, while his family's bodies had not yet been found.
So she's supposed to get home at like 11. She got home at like 1:48. She got in bed about 2.
What was she going for? Like family trip or what?
It was a Thrive direct sales. It was a local event that was down there between a bunch of leaders in the company.
And that day she was back. I mean,
I left work early that morning, like 5:15, 5:30. So like she barely gotten into bed pretty much.
And you know, this might be a tough question, but did you guys get into an argument before she left?
It wasn't like an argument. We had an emotional conversation, but I'll leave it at that. But I just want them back. I just want them to come back. And if they're not safe right now, that's what's tearing me apart. Because if they are safe, they're coming back. But if they're not, this has got to stop. Like somebody has to come forward.
You spoken to her family, like her parents?
Yeah, they've been in constant contact, like every hour. I mean, everybody back in North Carolina and the East Coast. I mean, from Maine to Florida.
What is her parents saying to you? Like,
they're just like if they need to get on a flight, just let them know. Because I mean, they feel helpless right now because they're on the opposite side of the country. I mean, Colorado is. I mean, you can't just drive around and look. I mean, it's just like you wouldn't really know what you're looking for. That's what the cops pretty much told me. That first day, I was like, I want to get out and drive around. They said, you wouldn't know what to look for.
Last couple questions. What is law enforcement? What have the police or the sheriffs or your neighbors? Is anybody? What's police saying to you?
Right now, this is what they're doing right now is with the canines in the sense. I think this is the biggest thing. This is the biggest thing they've done so far because yesterday Frederick Police Department did all the searching of the house and tried to gather whatever information they could. And with the detectives, officers, and sergeants, and today it's, I mean, obviously with all the activity that's around, there's a lot going on around here, and I really hope that all of this can lead to something positive.
What did your neighbors, did they see anything? Did your neighbors see anything?
No, like the police department went door to door asking, like cameras and everything, just like nothing.
And my last question, if you have any though, so feel free to step in. My last question is, if your wife can see this, if she can watch this, what would you like to tell your wife and your kids?
Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
And gave an interview that forensic behavioral analyst would later describe as one of the most studied examples of deceptive presentation in the history of true crime media coverage. He said he wanted them back. He said the house was not complete without them. He said he hoped somebody would bring them back safely. He was standing in front of the house where Shanann had died hours before. 2 days later, after a polygraph examination revealed significant deception, Chris Watts sat across from investigators in an interview room and the mask began to come apart. He told them Shanann came home from the airport, got into bed at 2 in the morning, that at 4:15 he got back into bed beside her and they had an emotional conversation about separation, about the house they were considering, about the life that was falling apart around both of them. He said they were both crying. He said she told him she was going to take the kids to a friend's house for the day. Then he said he went downstairs, made a protein shake, packed his lunch, and left for work at 5:30. Investigators listened, and then they told him they knew he was lying. What followed, across multiple interviews, a confession, and eventually a guilty plea, revealed the full horror of what had actually happened inside that house in the early hours of August the 13th.
Doorbell detects the visitor. So when we were over at the neighbor's house, the next day we were looking at his camera as well, and it didn't show anybody walking up to the driveway, which was kind of weird. That's the only reason I put that on there, because it showed Nicole dropping her off, but nobody actually walking up to the house. It was kind of weird, but she was in the house.
Okay.
So,
and what time are we talking?
This is still 1:48.
Okay.
So, 2 a.m., Shanann gets in the bed with me. 4 a.m., that's when my alarm goes off for work, and I'm supposed to get dressed, brush my teeth, everything I do upstairs.
Okay.
4:15, that's when I get back, slide right into bed next to her, and start having a conversation with her about having the house up for sale, and talking about actually proceeding with the separation.
Okay.
And obviously it gets pretty emotional, like we're talking about, we felt the disconnection was there, like falling out of love, and trying to stay together, maybe just for the kids' sake, but we're realizing that doing our homework, it's not, most of the time that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And it gets pretty emotional because we have 2 beautiful kids and we have 1 on the way. So it's just a matter of it was very emotional, we were both crying, and at the end, we just said, she said she was going to take the kids to her friend's house for the day. She would be back. Okay. I was like, okay, it's fine. And so I went downstairs, made my protein shake. It was 5 a.m., that's when I did that. Packed my lunchbox, had my oatmeal, chicken, filled my water jug up. 5:15, I went outside, backed my truck up, was loaded up. Had my book bag, my lunchbox, computer, water jug, my big clear container. I put big clear containers in my truck so it's easy just to pull out, pull in, just depending on what I'm going to use. My O-ring kit, I knew I was going to do some stuffing box rubbers that day, so I got some various open wrenches from my toolbox. I know those would work better than the ones they would give me.
Okay.
5:30, that's when I went to work.
Okay.
And I hadn't heard from Shanann for about 2 hours there, so at 7:40 I texted her and asked her if she could tell me where the kids were if she took them anywhere.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay.
At 12 I texted her again, call me. Nothing. And then about 12:10 p.m. that's when my doorbell visitor, it read another visitor, and I was like, it popped up on my phone and it says it was Nicole. And I tried to put it on my phone to see if she's just trying to get in or whatnot. And I hear her she's on the phone trying to, I could hear her through my phone saying she's trying to get to Shanann, so that's when I called her. I called her at 12:20, see what was going on. She told me that Shanann hadn't responded to any of her calls all day, or any of her friends' calls all day.
Okay.
And that's That's very.
But here is what most coverage of this case has never properly examined. What did Shanann's body tell investigators that Chris Watts never intended anyone to know? When the Weld County District Attorney initially sought to seal the autopsy reports for Shanann and her daughters, the stated reason was that the cause of death would be critical evidence in any prosecution. A judge ruled that only the county coroner, not the district attorney, had the authority to seal autopsy reports. The documents were released, and what those documents contained was a forensic record of Shanann Watts' final moments, a record that, when examined against Chris Watts' own timeline and statements, raised questions about the sequence of events that the official narrative had smoothed over. An autopsy does not simply record what killed someone. It records the story the body tells about how it happened, the sequence of injuries, the positioning of trauma, the physiological indicators that establish not just cause of death but context, the difference between a single impulsive act and a sequence of events that unfolded over time. And Shanann's autopsy told a story that was more complicated than the simple timeline Chris Watts presented. Let us start with what the forensic record established about the nature of her injuries. Shanann Watts was strangled. That is the documented cause of her death. But the specific nature and patterning of the injuries documented in the autopsy, the bruising, the contusions, the marks on her body, told investigators something beyond the basic cause. Defensive injuries are among the most forensically significant findings in any homicide case. They are the body's instinctive response to an attack, arms raised, hands extended, the physical evidence of someone who did not simply succumb but actively attempted to protect themselves. Injuries on Shanann's arms and hands were consistent with this pattern. Contusions documented on her body indicated the kind of physical resistance that does not happen in a person who was taken completely by surprise or who was unconscious before the violence began. This matters because of the timeline Chris Watts presented. His account described an emotional conversation, tears, a discussion about separation and the children and the life they were trying to hold together. He claimed Shanann was alive, conscious, and communicating with him at 4:15 in the morning. He claimed she left with the girls afterward. But defensive injuries, the specific positioning and nature of the trauma documented in the autopsy, are inconsistent with the account of a man who described his wife as present and communicating within hours of her death. They are consistent with a woman who fought back. Forensic pathologists who study homicide cases consistently identify a set of physical indicators that distinguish premeditated violence from spontaneous rage. The difference is not always obvious in the moment, but the body preserves it. One of those indicators is the healing stage of injuries. Fresh injuries occur in the minutes or hours before death. Injuries in various stages of healing, bruises at different points in the process of fading or forming, tell a different story. They suggest repeated encounters, a pattern of physical confrontation that did not begin on August the 13th. The documentation of Shanann's physical state, the injuries recorded across her body, raised questions for forensic examiners about whether what ended her life was genuinely a single spontaneous act or the culmination of something that had been building with increasing physical intensity. Chris Watts himself later admitted, in the follow-up interview conducted at Dodge Correctional Institution in December of 2018, that the murders had been planned for several weeks before August the 13th. That the conversation in bed that morning was not an emotional eruption, but the execution of a decision he had already made. If the violence was planned, if it was not the sudden explosion of rage that the initial official narrative suggested, then the forensic evidence of Shanann's physical state in the autopsy takes on a different weight. It becomes not just the record of how she died, but a window into what the days and weeks before her death actually looked like inside that house. The toxicology findings in Shanann's autopsy added another dimension to the forensic picture. Her blood work was clean. No substances that would have altered her ability to respond, resist, or communicate in the hours before her death. This is significant because it directly contradicts any narrative that would suggest she was incapacitated or unaware of what was happening to her. She was fully conscious. She was fully present. And the defensive injuries documented in the autopsy confirm that she responded to what was being done to her in the way any conscious person would. She fought. But here is the detail that forensic specialists note as particularly significant in cases of this type. Elevated stress markers, The physiological indicators that the body produces in response to prolonged psychological and emotional distress were present in her system. Not the acute stress of a single terrifying moment, but the kind of chronic, sustained stress that accumulates over time in a person living under conditions of significant psychological pressure. Shanann had spent months aware that her marriage was collapsing, aware of financial pressures, aware that Chris had become a different person, aware, from texts she sent to friends in the weeks before her death, that something was deeply wrong in her home. Her body confirmed what her text messages said. She had been living under sustained and serious stress in the period leading up to August the 13th. The official timeline in this case was always Chris Watts' timeline. He described events. Law enforcement, working on a 90-day investigation that ended with a guilty plea before the evidentiary record could be fully tested in a courtroom, built their understanding of what happened largely around the framework he provided. But forensic pathology operates independently of the account given by the person responsible. The body does not conform to a convenient narrative. It records what actually happened regardless of what someone standing in front of a television camera wants the world to believe. The inconsistencies in rigor mortis patterning, the specific physiological changes that occur in a body after death, and that forensic examiners use to establish a time of death range, raise questions about whether Shanann's death occurred precisely when Chris Watts said it did. Rigor mortis and livor mortis, the pooling of blood in the body after circulation stops, are the medical examiner's most reliable tools for establishing a death timeline. And the patterns documented in Shanann's case did not align cleanly with the timeline Chris Watts presented. He described an emotional conversation at 4:15 in the morning. He described her as alive and planning to take the children somewhere. He described leaving for work at 5:30. The forensic indicators suggested that the sequence of events may have unfolded differently than the account he constructed, that the timeline he offered authorities in those first critical hours of the investigation was as carefully rehearsed as every other aspect of his presentation. Chris Watts gave a news interview 2 days after killing his family. Behavioral analysts who later studied that footage in detail noted specific patterns that distinguished his presentation from genuine distress. The effect was controlled in a way that genuine grief rarely is. The answers were precise and detailed in areas where honest uncertainty would be expected. The emotional displays, the pauses, the voice breaks, occurred in response to prompts rather than spontaneously. He described calling and texting Shanann during the day after he left for work. He described the moment her friend Nicole arrived as the trigger for his concern. He described wanting them to come back and being torn apart by not knowing if they were safe. Every word was technically accurate in its structure, and every word was designed to create a specific impression. But here is what the forensic record confirms about that interview. He was standing in front of a house where Shanann's body had been inside just hours before he moved it. He was describing concern about people he had already killed. He was performing grief for a camera while the investigation he was describing was looking for people he knew would never be found alive. The autopsy findings, the defensive injuries, the stress markers, the forensic timeline questions are the physical counterpart to that performance. They are the record of what his body could not hide, even as his voice and face and carefully chosen words constructed a different story for the world. One of the most forensically significant details in this case involves the positioning and discovery of Shanann's body. Chris Watts eventually led investigators to the Anadarko Petroleum work site where he had brought her remains. She had been placed in a shallow grave at the site. Bella and Celeste, 4 years old and 3 years old, had been placed inside crude oil tanks on the same property. The manner in which their bodies were concealed, the specific choices made about location and method, told investigators something beyond the murders themselves. These were not the panicked decisions of a man who had acted impulsively and was trying desperately to cover his actions. The location required access knowledge specific to his job. The concealment method required deliberate planning. The transportation required timing and calculation. His later admission that the murders had been planned for weeks, not the product of a single morning's emotional conversation, was consistent with the forensic evidence at the scene. Everything about how the bodies were found confirmed what the autopsy confirmed about how the deaths occurred. This was not spontaneous. It was constructed. There is one more dimension of the forensic record in this case that deserves to be examined directly. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant when she died. Her son, the child she had planned to name Nico, was part of the autopsy findings. Forensic examinations in cases involving pregnant victims record the status of the pregnancy as part of the complete physical record. Nico was never given a name in a hospital, never held, never brought home. He existed only in the documents that recorded his mother's death and in the grief of the family that lost him alongside her. Chris Watts later admitted in the December 2018 interview that he had attempted to end Shanann's pregnancy in the weeks before the murders. That detail, the documented attempt to harm the pregnancy before August the 13th, connected directly to the forensic evidence of elevated stress in Shanann's system. The physical toll of what she had been living through in the weeks before her death was recorded in her body, even if it was never fully examined in a courtroom. The Weld County District Attorney sought to seal the autopsy reports. The stated reason was that the cause of death would be critical evidence. The unstated reality, the thing that sits underneath the procedural language of a sealing request, is that autopsy findings in cases that proceed to a guilty plea rather than a full trial never receive the level of scrutiny they would receive from defense experts, independent forensic analysts, and the adversarial examination of cross-examination. Chris Watts' guilty plea in November of 2018 meant that the evidence, including the autopsy findings, never had to survive a courtroom. It was never subjected to the full pressure of a defense that would have brought its own forensic experts, its own timeline analysis, its own reading of the physical evidence. The questions raised by the autopsy findings were never answered in open court. They were filed, documented, released when the judge ruled they could not be sealed, and then largely set aside in the rush of coverage that followed the confession, the plea, and the sentencing. But the documents remain. The forensic record remains. The questions embedded in the physical evidence of Shanann's final hours remain. And 8 years after her death, after everything that has been written, analyzed, examined, and discussed about this case, the body of a woman who fought back in the early hours of August the 13th, 2018 still carries evidence that the official narrative never fully confronted. Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She was 15 weeks pregnant. She had built a life, documented it openly and generously for thousands of people who followed her online, and loved the people in it with everything she had. She did not deserve what happened to her. Bella was 4 years old. Celeste was 3 years old. Nico never drew a breath outside his mother's body. The autopsy findings in this case are not just a medical document. They are the last testimony of a woman who could not speak for herself. The physical record of her final hours. The evidence her body preserved even when the man who killed her believed he had controlled every other part of the story. She fought back. The autopsy says so. And that truth, documented, preserved, and available in the public record, deserves to be heard as clearly as every other detail this case has produced. Because Shanann Watts' story does not end with a guilty plea and a sentencing in a cell in Wisconsin. It ends with the truth. All of it. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is over there right now. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who has followed this case. And subscribe to Dark Pulse with the notification bell turned all the way on. For Shanann, for Bella, for Celeste, and for Nico who never had a single day. Their story deserves every truth it can be given. And Dark Pulse is not done giving it.